In our African American Studies class, we have learned so many different history of the African Americans from the past, present, and nowadays. One thing that stuck to me was the Harriet Tubman in the Underground Railroad when we talked about that. I've never learned about this in any of my high school or middle school classes, but this is something that we should know about and be educated on because it really is important in history to know about. I'm going to be talking about who is Harriet Tubman and what is the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad was a network for enslaved African Americans, which offered shelter and aid to the escaped enslaved people from the South. This served as a space for when people escaped from slavery moving to the North. Most enslaved African Americans tried to head to the North, but where the African Americans were considered free. But after the Fugitive Slave Act came through, they tried fleeing to Canada, which was considered a free country. The first act passed in 1793. So, this act allowed local governments to apprehend and extradite escaped enslaved people from within the borders of the free state. And then would either, keep them there and have them in jail for the rest of their lives, or would send them back to their masters. So this act also punished anybody who helped the fugitives, which were the enslaved African Americans. So if you were to help them escape, for example, if Harriet Tubman was caught, she would have been punished, mostly with death. So Harriet Tubman was the most famous conductor for the Underground Railroad. Harriet Tubman was married and she was born as an enslaved woman in the North. Sorry, in the South. She escaped the plantation with her brother, and so Harriet Tubman, she would return to the plantation on several occasions to rescue family members and other enslaved African Americans. On her third try to go back to the plantation, she tried to rescue her husband, but he had remarried and refused to leave. The Underground Railroad was used metaphorically, not literally. It was actually not a actual railroad, but it served the same purpose as a railroad. It transported people long distances. It did not also run underground, but through homes, barns, churches, and businesses. So some of the people in the North would open up their homes or barns or churches, even businesses, to like have these underground tunnels, and would keep the free African Americans or the enslaved that were enslaved African Americans hidden in their houses, wherever the railroad took them to. And they would keep them there until then they would continue on with their journey to go to either Canada or to another state that was free in the North. In all of her journey, she has never lost a single passenger, which is one of her biggest moments and accomplishments in history. She never lost a single African American person who was enslaved. There was also another guy named John Brown who was an abolitionist who worked with the Underground Railroad. So he did work with Harriet Tubman. So he was born during the slavery in Virginia. So Brown believed that slavery was an evil thing, that it should end by any means necessary. And he believed that all people should be free and treated equally with respect. In 1851, Brown organized a group of armed pledge to free any person caught by slave catchers. So, with the act, people in the community were also able to catch the enslaved African Americans and take them to jail or keep them and send them back to where they were. So, what he would do is he would go in and free any of this enslaved African Americans that were captured, and would try to help them through the journey of the Underground Railroad to go to Canada, which was considered a free state. Um, we have learned so much about these brave people that wanted to change the world, and they did in many different ways. Racism is something that's not going to go away. It's going to be here. We can try changing people's minds. We can try educating on them on stuff, but it's something that's going to stay in the world, and it's never going to change unless you advocate towards changing it. I've talked about how Harriet Tubman and how she and John Brown helped enslaved African Americans to freedom, and how they tried to take them to to Canada to make sure they are free. They took them through these journeys that were really difficult, but they did it. I also talked about how the Underground Railroad would work, how it would go through people's homes, barns, churches, and businesses, how other people in the North would also help them try to try to make sure that the African Americans were free. Thank you so much for letting me speak about this.